Did you know that according to recent psychological studies, 1 in 16 people you meet is a narcissist? That means there's a strong chance you've already been manipulated by one, maybe without even realizing it. And here's the disturbing part. Narcissists don't just act confident. They engineer your emotions. They study you, mirror your desires, and feed on your attention like oxygen. So when you ask yourself, how does a narcissist act? You're really asking something much deeper. How do they make us doubt our reality while convincing us they're the only truth? Harvard research shows that narcissistic manipulation can alter your brain chemistry, literally rewiring how you perceive love, trust, and safety. That's why leaving them feels like detoxing from a drug you never knew you were taking. But once you understand their psychology, their rhythm, their mirror, their illusion, you start to see through the act. You'll never fall for it the same way again. Before we dive into the heart of this, do me a favor, like this video, and tell me in the comments, is it a male or a female narcissist you've crossed paths with? According to a 2023 Harvard study, nearly 6% of the global population displays narcissistic traits strong enough to distort relationships and emotional perception. That's 1 in every 16 people you meet. And what's fascinating is that most of them don't come across as arrogant monsters at first. They appear charming, attentive, almost magnetic. Freud called this the narcissistic investment, the way the ego projects an idealized version of itself to attract admiration. Jung went further, describing it as a shadow seduction, where the narcissist lures others into seeing the best parts of themselves reflected in him. Think about the last time someone made you feel completely seen, like every word you said mattered. That instant connection, that warmth, that rare feeling of being understood. It wasn't random. Narcissists are masters of emotional mimicry. Studies from the University of Amsterdam show they mirror your body language, your tone, even your interests, within minutes of meeting you. They do it so precisely that your brain releases dopamine, associating that person with safety and recognition. You feel at ease, but what you're actually feeling is a neurochemical illusion. Carl Jung once said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." The narcissist understands this better than most. They don't just wear a disguise, they become your reflection. They sense your insecurities, your ambitions, your need for validation, and they embody them perfectly. You're not falling for them. You're falling for the version of yourself they project back at you, and that's why it feels so powerful. When Nietzsche wrote that the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, he unknowingly described the narcissistic dynamic. You're overwhelmed not by the narcissist's power, but by your own longing to be seen, accepted, admired. In that first stage, you don't see manipulation, you see connection. You don't feel danger, you feel destiny. Psychologists call this the love-bombing phase. It's not always romantic. It can happen at work, in friendships, even in families. A narcissistic parent, for instance, will flood a child with affection right after a moment of cruelty, creating an emotional dependency. The brain learns to associate approval with survival. Over time, that confusion blurs the line between love and control. It's a pattern that can last years if unnoticed. What makes it even more dangerous is that narcissists often appear incredibly successful. According to research from the University of Georgia, narcissists earn 20% more on average in leadership roles, not because they're more competent, but because they project confidence so convincingly that others mistake it for skill. Their posture, their tone, their sense of certainty, it all creates an aura of authority. You might admire them, envy them, or want to be close to them. That's part of the trap. Philosophically, Descartes believed that identity begins with the thought, "I think, therefore I am." But narcissists twist this. "I am admired, therefore I exist." Their sense of self depends entirely on how others see them, and that's where you come in. They choose people with empathy, intelligence, and emotional depth because you're capable of feeding their image. They don't admire you for who you are. They admire how well you reflect who they want to be. The seduction works like a hypnotic dance. Each compliment feels like truth, but it's calculation. Each story they share feels intimate, but it's rehearsed. Yet it's not entirely fake. Narcissists believe their own performance. They have to. Psychologists describe it as ego fragility, a constant fear of exposure. Deep down, they sense their emptiness, so they overcompensate with perfection. The more attention they receive, the stronger their illusion becomes. But when that attention fades, so does their identity. That's when the cruelty begins to surface. Eckhart Tolle once explained that the ego thrives on both praise and conflict. It doesn't care which one as long as it feels important. The narcissist's mind works the same way. They'll build you up to feel powerful, then break you down to feel superior. It's never about love. It's about control of the emotional narrative. And because they've studied your reactions so well, they know exactly when to give, when to withhold, when to disappear. You might wonder, how could I fall for this? The truth is, anyone can. Empathy and intuition, the very traits that make you human, also make you vulnerable. Your desire to see good in others blinds you to manipulation. That's not weakness, it's conditioning. From childhood, we're taught that attention equals love and approval equals worth. Narcissists exploit that programming better than anyone. So how do you recognize it early? It starts with noticing the speed. Real connection takes time. Manipulation feels like instant magic. Pay attention to consistency over intensity. Ask yourself, do they listen or do they perform listening? Do they admire you or the way you admire them? Every narcissist begins as a mirror, but mirrors don't have depth. What you see is what you project. The seduction of the mirror is powerful because it doesn't start with lies. It starts with your truth, reflected, magnified, and turned into a weapon. And by the time you realize it, you're already hooked on your own reflection. That's how they win, not by overpowering you, but by convincing you that their approval defines your worth. Understanding this is the first step toward breaking the illusion. Because once you stop seeking yourself in their reflection, the mirror loses its power. According to a study from the American Psychological Association, over 60% of people who have been in relationships with narcissists report a persistent sense of confusion and guilt long after the relationship ends. It's not because they were weak, it's because they were conditioned to confuse control with love. Freud described this dynamic as a repetition compulsion, the subconscious drive to reenact emotional wounds in search of resolution. But narcissists exploit that drive. They turn affection into a currency and validation into chains. At first, everything feels balanced. You give attention, they give charm. You share emotions, they share admiration. But soon something shifts. The narcissist begins to control the rhythm of the relationship like a conductor shaping an orchestra. They decide when harmony plays and when silence dominates. One day, they'll flood you with warmth. The next, they'll vanish or withdraw affection without explanation. The contrast creates anxiety, and anxiety breeds dependency. In psychology, this is known as intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism casinos use to keep gamblers hooked. Your brain starts craving their approval the way an addict craves a win. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's exactly what happens here. The narcissist's behavior feels like fate, a magnetic push and pull that seems inexplicable. But behind that illusion lies a clear system of manipulation. They test your boundaries not because they hate you, but because they need to know the limits of your loyalty. Every emotional reaction you show becomes data. They learn what hurts you, what soothes you, what keeps you coming back. Psychologists at Stanford University found that narcissists score high in cognitive empathy, the ability to understand emotions, but low in affective empathy, the ability to feel them. That's why they can read you so well without ever truly caring. They analyze your behavior like a scientist studying an experiment. When you cry, they don't feel sadness, they feel power. When you praise them, they don't feel loved, they feel confirmed. Their entire sense of self revolves around external validation, but they never truly absorb it. It's a black hole of approval, constantly hungry, never full. Nietzsche once warned that whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. The tragedy is that many victims of narcissistic control begin to mirror those behaviors over time. You start apologizing when you've done nothing wrong, filtering your emotions to avoid conflict, even doubting your own perception. It's called gaslighting, and it's one of their most effective tools. By distorting your reality, they make you rely on theirs. You stop trusting your memory and start depending on their version of truth. Imagine this. You express a concern, maybe something simple. They twist it. Suddenly, you're too sensitive, imagining things, or overreacting. Each time you back down, they gain control. And yet the more they dismiss you, the more you seek their reassurance. It's a psychological trap known as trauma bonding, the emotional attachment formed through cycles of reward and punishment. You start measuring your worth through their reactions. If they smile, you breathe. If they frown, you crumble. Philosophically, this pattern echoes the Stoic warning from Epictetus. If someone can make you angry, you have become their slave. Narcissists understand this instinctively. They provoke emotions not to connect but to dominate. They'll criticize you subtly, compliments with hidden daggers. You're amazing when you actually try. You look great today, why not like this more often? Each phrase plants doubt while sounding supportive. You start performing for their approval, losing spontaneity, losing self-trust. In professional settings, the dance looks different but feels the same. A narcissistic boss might praise your dedication one moment and humiliate you the next, keeping you perpetually striving. A 2019 study from the University of London revealed that employees under narcissistic leaders show 30% higher stress levels and 25% lower self-esteem compared to others. Why? Because narcissists rule through emotional chaos. They destabilize your confidence to secure control. Eckhart Tolle would say the narcissist's ego thrives on conflict because peace threatens its survival. When things are calm, they'll ignite tension just to feel alive. You might notice how arguments start without reason, how they reinterpret your words until you doubt your own intentions. It's not misunderstanding, it's strategy. Every argument keeps you emotionally invested, and every reconciliation resets the bond stronger than before. But here's what most people don't realize. The narcissist fears losing control more than anything. Beneath the arrogance lies terror, the terror of insignificance. The need for validation is endless because their self-image is hollow. They crave admiration the way a drowning man craves air, but every breath fades too quickly. And when they sense you pulling away, they panic. They'll suddenly become kind again, affectionate, nostalgic, not out of love but survival. This cycle can continue for years, even decades, because it's built on your empathy, the very quality that makes you human. The key is awareness. The moment you stop dancing to their rhythm, the illusion begins to crumble. You'll notice how predictable the pattern truly is. Praise, withdrawal, chaos, apology, repeat. The game ends when you stop playing. Freud once noted that being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. That's where healing begins. See the dance for what it is, a performance of power, not passion. The narcissist's control depends on your confusion. Clarity is your rebellion. Once you recognize the choreography, you no longer move to their beat. You create your own. And in that quiet awareness, their control begins to dissolve. When Carl Jung explored the myth of Narcissus, he didn't see it as a story about vanity, but about spiritual blindness. Narcissus didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with an image, his reflection, untouchable and hollow. Jung wrote that the narcissist's tragedy is not self-love, but the failure to meet the self. In other words, the narcissist doesn't truly know who they are. They spend their lives chasing validation because their inner world is fragmented, disconnected from any authentic sense of being. Psychology confirms this fragmentation. Modern studies estimate that 1 in 25 adults exhibit narcissistic personality traits severe enough to disrupt relationships or careers. Yet beneath the arrogance and grandiosity, researchers find something surprising: deep insecurity. Freud believed that narcissism begins as a necessary developmental stage. Every child must first see themselves as the center of the world before learning empathy. But when that process is interrupted by neglect, overindulgence, or trauma, the ego freezes in place. The child grows, but their emotional structure doesn't. The adult remains trapped in an endless loop of seeking admiration to replace genuine self-worth. Nietzsche called this the will to power gone astray. Instead of mastering themselves, narcissists attempt to master others. They replace internal strength with external domination. He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises, Nietzsche wrote, a paradox that defines the narcissistic psyche. They loathe their inner weakness, but even that hatred gives them a sense of identity. Better to be powerful in illusion than powerless in truth. Socrates, centuries earlier, offered a cure without naming it. Know thyself, he said, not as advice but as a warning. Narcissists live in constant opposition to this principle. They know their image intimately, but their essence not at all. Their self-awareness stops at the surface. The philosopher René Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am." For the narcissist it becomes, "I am admired, therefore I exist." Their consciousness depends on reflection from others, not introspection from within. Remove the mirror, and they vanish. In philosophy, this dependence on external perception is called phenomenological identity, the idea that existence is defined by how one appears to others. Jean-Paul Sartre described it as being for others, where one's sense of self becomes hostage to external judgment. Narcissists live entirely in that state. Their identity is performative, fluid, adaptable, like a mask that changes with each audience. And the mask always looks flawless, because beneath it lies terror, the fear of being ordinary, unseen, irrelevant. Jung's notion of the persona helps explain this further. The persona is the social face we present to the world, a necessary filter between the self and society. But when the persona becomes overdeveloped, it consumes the true self entirely. The narcissist no longer plays a role. They are the role. And when life challenges that role, through failure, criticism, or rejection, they experience not disappointment, but annihilation. That's why narcissists react so violently to even mild critique. It's not an attack on behavior, it's an attack on their existence. Sigmund Freud noticed this same fragility in his patients. He described narcissists as having a delusion of grandeur built upon a foundation of shame. They construct a perfect self-image to protect the wounded child within. Every compliment is a patch on that fragile structure. Every slight is an earthquake. That's why they oscillate between arrogance and despair, superiority and self-pity. Their mind is a pendulum swinging between inflated pride and secret humiliation. Eckhart Tolle would describe this as the ultimate ego trap, the confusion of being with image. In his words, the ego wants to be both separate and superior. The narcissist feeds this ego until it becomes their entire identity. They are trapped in what Tolle calls the pain body, reliving emotional wounds through control and validation. Their relationships aren't about connection, they're about survival. Each interaction is an opportunity to confirm once again that they exist through attention. Descartes sought truth through doubt. The narcissist seeks truth through admiration, yet both are driven by a similar hunger to prove that their mind and existence matter. The difference is humility. The philosopher doubts himself to grow. The narcissist doubts himself and compensates by creating an empire of illusion. One seeks depth, the other seeks reflection. When you understand this, the narcissist's behavior stops being mysterious. It becomes mechanical. Every grand gesture hides fragility. Every cruel remark hides fear. Their self-obsession isn't arrogance, it's desperation. The narcissist is not at peace in the mirror, they are imprisoned by it. Plato's allegory of the cave captures this perfectly. Imagine prisoners mistaking shadows for reality, unaware of the world beyond the wall. Narcissists are those prisoners. Their reflections are their shadows, and admiration is the flickering fire that gives those shadows form. But truth, the real world beyond, terrifies them. To face it, they would have to turn away from their reflection, to see their flaws, their emptiness, their humanity. Most never do. And yet understanding this is empowering. Because when you see their behavior as fear, not strength, manipulation loses its mystique. Narcissists don't seek to destroy you. They seek to confirm themselves through you. Once you stop providing that confirmation, their power fades. The mirror cracks. Their dance loses rhythm. In the end, narcissism isn't a story about superiority, it's about avoidance. The avoidance of self, of pain, of authenticity. And once you understand that, you no longer envy the confidence of the narcissist. You see it for what it is, the noise of someone drowning out their own silence. Every story built on illusion eventually meets reality. For a narcissist, that collision is catastrophic. According to the Journal of Personality Disorders, over 80% of individuals with high narcissistic traits experience what psychologists call a narcissistic injury, at least once in their lives. A moment when their mask cracks, their control slips, and the world stops mirroring back perfection. It could be a breakup, a job loss, public criticism, or even someone simply refusing to play along. When it happens, their world doesn't just tremble, it collapses. Freud described this moment as ego death in miniature. The fragile ego, long inflated by admiration, suddenly deflates under the weight of truth. The narcissist cannot process shame the way others do. For most of us, shame can guide reflection, helping us grow. But for them, shame is annihilation. So instead of facing it, they externalize it, they blame, they accuse, they rewrite reality. Nietzsche once warned, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster." But the narcissist becomes precisely that, the very monster their ego fears. They project their inner chaos outward, creating enemies where none exist, rewriting betrayal where only boundaries were drawn. Carl Jung saw this collapse as a spiritual event. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The narcissist's life is ruled by unconscious pain, and when reality challenges their fantasy, that pain resurfaces with brutal intensity. They lash out not because they hate you, but because you've become the mirror that no longer reflects their illusion. To preserve the image, they must destroy the mirror. This is why narcissists often demonize the people they once idealized. In their mind, the story must remain consistent. They are the hero, and anyone who exposes their weakness becomes the villain. This is when gaslighting intensifies. Studies from the University of Berkeley show that narcissists, when confronted with their behavior, will double down on denial rather than self-reflection. They twist facts, distort timelines, and manipulate emotions to make you doubt your own memory. You might start to wonder if you're overreacting, if maybe you did misunderstand, if perhaps you're the problem. That confusion is their last form of control. It's not madness on your part, it's strategy on theirs. Philosophically, Descartes' search for truth through doubt, "I think, therefore I am," offers an interesting contrast. The narcissist lives in the opposite direction. "I am admired, therefore I must be right." When admiration fades, their certainty collapses. To maintain their sense of reality, they must bend yours. That's why they rewrite history with alarming ease. They don't just lie to you, they lie to themselves first. It's a form of psychological survival, a refusal to acknowledge the void beneath the mask. But there's a deeper layer here, one that modern neuroscience helps us understand. Studies using fMRI scans show that narcissists' brains respond to rejection the same way as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the area that processes distress, lights up intensely when their ego is threatened. It's not metaphorical pain, it's biological. The rejection of admiration feels like an attack on their survival. So when they rage, withdraw, or retaliate, they're not being dramatic, they're fighting an internal collapse. Yet, amid this chaos, something fascinating happens for those on the receiving end. You begin to wake up. The fog that once blurred your intuition starts to clear. The compliments sound rehearsed. The apologies feel hollow. You notice patterns instead of promises. This awakening is painful. It's the emotional equivalent of withdrawal. You're no longer getting the dopamine hit of validation. You're seeing reality unfiltered, and it hurts. But that pain is also liberation. Eckhart Tolle describes awakening as the collapse of an identity that was never real. That's exactly what happens when you finally step out of a narcissist's narrative. You start recognizing that the person you loved, admired, or feared wasn't truly there. It was an image built from your projections and their manipulation. Once the illusion shatters, you begin to see both them and yourself more clearly. You realize that your empathy was weaponized. your kindness mistaken for weakness, and your patience turned into submission. But none of that defines you. It reveals your capacity for love, not your lack of strength. Jung believed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. In the narcissistic bond, that transformation is asymmetrical. They absorb your energy, your identity, your light. When you leave, they seek new sources, while you're left rebuilding what was taken. But that rebuilding is sacred work, because for the first time, you're not chasing reflection, you're rediscovering essence. And this is where the tension peaks. When the narcissist realizes their control is fading, they enter the devaluation phase. Suddenly, everything they once praised becomes a flaw. Your empathy becomes too emotional. Your independence becomes cold. Your success becomes selfish. They try to rewrite the story so that their rejection of you feels justified. This isn't random cruelty. It's narrative preservation. If you're the villain, they remain the hero. But here lies your turning point. The moment you see the game, you stop playing it. You understand that their attacks are confessions, their cruelty is projection, their silence is fear. You no longer take their behavior personally because you finally see the machinery behind it. You stop asking why and start observing how. That's when your power returns. Freud once said that being entirely honest with oneself is the best form of therapy. The narcissist cannot do that, but you can. And that's why you win quietly and profoundly. The illusion breaks not through confrontation, but through awareness. Once you accept that they were never who they pretended to be, you reclaim your peace. Reality at last becomes your ally, not your enemy. And from that truth, everything begins to heal. According to recent studies published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology, survivors of narcissistic relationships often take an average of 7 attempts before fully breaking free from the emotional cycle. Not because they lack strength, but because manipulation thrives in confusion. Awareness, true awareness, is the only force that ends the cycle for good. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In the case of narcissistic abuse, that fate looks like endless self-doubt. Awareness transforms that doubt into clarity. When you first begin to see through the narcissist's patterns, it doesn't feel empowering, it feels destabilizing. The mask drops, and the person you thought you knew dissolves into contradictions. You start questioning everything. Was any of it real? Was the affection genuine? Did I imagine the manipulation? The human brain hates uncertainty, so it looks for explanations. That's why survivors often feel pulled back. Freud called it repetition compulsion, the unconscious urge to re-enter painful situations in search of resolution. But the truth is, resolution never comes from them. It comes from you. Self-trust begins the moment you decide to believe your own perception again. Narcissists attack that first. They twist memory, deny reality, rewrite every scene until you doubt your own mind. Reclaiming trust means rebuilding the bridge between your intuition and your logic. Neuroscience shows that chronic gaslighting reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, and increases stress hormones that cloud judgment. The more you doubt yourself, the more compliant you become. Awareness literally rewires the brain in the opposite direction. Every moment you trust your instincts, even in small ways, your neural pathways of self-confidence grow stronger. Philosophers have long known that awareness is liberation. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is slavery. Descartes believed that the act of thinking, the recognition of self-awareness, was proof of existence. But what if awareness isn't just intellectual? What if it's emotional intelligence, the ability to notice when your body tightens, when your gut says, something's off? That subtle awareness is your compass. Narcissists sever that connection so you rely on their approval instead of your intuition. Reconnecting with it is the first act of freedom. Nietzsche once wrote that, "The man who fights monsters must take care not to become one. The danger after leaving a narcissist is overcorrection. You might close off, distrust everyone, even yourself." That's the ego's attempt to protect what was once vulnerable. But healing doesn't mean building walls, it means creating filters. You learn to recognize patterns instead of shutting down emotions. You understand that empathy isn't weakness, it's strength paired with discernment. True confidence isn't loud, it's quiet certainty. It's knowing that your peace no longer depends on someone else's chaos. Eckhart Tolle teaches that the ego feeds on reaction. When you stop reacting, you starve its power. Awareness gives you that pause, the sacred space between stimulus and response. Imagine you receive a manipulative text. Before, you'd rush to defend yourself. Now, you breathe. You see the tactic, not the trigger. In that moment, you are no longer their mirror. You are consciousness observing the game. That small shift is monumental. It's where freedom begins, one decision at a time. Psychologically, self-trust rebuilds through consistency, not grand gestures. Each time you make a decision aligned with your values, your nervous system recalibrates. Over time, the hypervigilance fades. The mind stops scanning for danger because it begins to trust you. A 2022 Yale study found that survivors who practiced daily self-validation, writing or speaking truths aloud, showed a 40% reduction in anxiety symptoms within 8 weeks. Awareness, when paired with self-compassion, literally reprograms the body. And here's the paradox: the more you understand narcissists, the less power they have. Their tactics only work in darkness. Once exposed, manipulation becomes predictable. You start noticing the exaggerated charm, the subtle guilt trips, the strategic silence. What once felt personal now feels patterned. You begin to see them not as omnipotent figures, but as emotionally arrested individuals replaying the same script. Compassion replaces confusion, not sympathy for their cruelty, but understanding for their emptiness. That understanding protects you without hardening you. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Awareness is that privilege. It's remembering that your empathy was never the problem. It was the gift that the narcissist exploited. When you combine empathy with discernment, you become untouchable. You can love deeply without losing yourself, give without guilt, and walk away without fear. So awareness isn't passive observation, it's active self-respect. It's the quiet recognition that you no longer need to explain your reality to anyone who profits from your confusion. Self-trust is knowing that the truth you feel is valid, even when no one else believes it. And once you live from that truth, the world shifts. You stop chasing mirrors and start seeing reflections of authenticity everywhere. That's the real power of awareness. It doesn't just free you from them, it brings you back to yourself. Every transformation begins where denial ends. When you've been entangled with a narcissist, the end often feels like collapse, like you've lost yourself, your confidence, even your identity. Yet research from the University of Michigan shows that over 70% of people who recover from narcissistic abuse report experiencing a phenomenon psychologists call post-traumatic growth. It's not mere survival, it's evolution. You don't just return to who you were before, you become someone more grounded, more self-aware, more powerful than you ever imagined. Pain becomes your catalyst. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He wasn't glorifying suffering, he was pointing to its hidden function. Pain strips away illusion. It removes the lies you've been told and the lies you've told yourself. The narcissist, in all their manipulation, unknowingly becomes your teacher. They expose the parts of you that longed too deeply for validation, that confused love with approval, that feared rejection more than betrayal. When that illusion burns away, what remains is truth. And truth, however raw, is freedom. Freud described the process of healing as where the ego was, the self shall be. In other words, healing isn't about rebuilding the old identity. It's about creating a new one, forged from awareness instead of defense. The narcissist built their world on mirrors. You now build yours on meaning. And meaning begins with ownership. You realize that the same mind once manipulated by illusion can also create liberation. The same heart that was deceived can now discern. The same vulnerability that was exploited becomes the foundation of authenticity. Nietzsche, who understood transformation more than most, wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, the confusion, the anger, the grief, is not your end. It's the raw material of growth. Transformation doesn't come through denial of the wound, but through its integration. You begin to see that every tear, every moment of self-doubt was part of your awakening. Without that confrontation, you might have never learned what self-respect truly feels like, or how peace tastes when it's not dependent on someone else's mood. Philosophically, this is where Stoicism and modern psychology meet. Epictetus taught that what disturbs us is not what happens, but our opinion about what happens. When you finally detach from the narcissist's narrative, you stop interpreting their actions as reflections of your worth. Their rejection no longer defines your value. It reveals their limits. Their silence no longer feels like punishment. It becomes space for you to grow. This is the shift from reaction to response, from victimhood to sovereignty. Eckhart Tolle would describe this stage as the emergence of the observer consciousness, the part of you that no longer fights reality, but flows with it. You start noticing how the mind wants to replay old stories, how the ego still craves validation, how emotional pain resurfaces in cycles. But instead of identifying with it, you observe it. Observation dissolves possession. The pain no longer owns you. It teaches you. You see emotions as visitors, not verdicts. That's when peace begins to settle, quietly but unmistakably. Neuroscience confirms this transformation physically. Studies on mindfulness-based therapy show that survivors who practice self-awareness and acceptance experience increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and reduced amygdala response. In simple terms, more clarity, less fear. The brain literally learns calm. You're not the same person rewired, you're the same soul refined. And something unexpected happens here: forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses or forgets, but the kind that frees you from carrying their poison. Forgiveness in this sense isn't about them, it's about energy. Holding on to anger keeps you bound to the story. Releasing it doesn't erase the past, it removes its power to define the future. Socrates once said, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." That's what this phase is about, building. You learn to trust again, to love again, but this time with awareness as your compass. You start meeting people who mirror your peace instead of your pain. You stop chasing intensity and start craving stability. You realize that love without respect isn't love, it's dependency. You stop performing to be seen because you finally learn to see yourself. And ironically, that authenticity, the one thing the narcissist could never give, becomes the most magnetic quality you now possess. Carl Rogers, one of the pioneers of humanistic psychology, believed that the curious paradox of healing is this: when you accept yourself as you are, you change. That's the final transformation, radical acceptance. You accept that you were deceived, that you were human, that you cared too much, trusted too deeply, but survived anyway. You see that being broken didn't destroy you. It opened you. It gave you eyes to see manipulation where others still see charm, and wisdom to recognize real love when it finally appears. And here's the most powerful truth: the narcissist's greatest fear becomes your greatest freedom. They live terrified of being ordinary, unseen, unadmired. But you've learned that peace doesn't need an audience. Your worth is no longer negotiable. Your silence is no longer submission, it's strength. Transformation isn't revenge, it's transcendence. You rise not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right, that your empathy was not weakness, that your openness was not a flaw, and that your light was never theirs to dim. You carry scars, yes, but they are no longer signs of damage. They are marks of wisdom. And when you finally look back, you don't see tragedy, you see initiation. Because in truth, freedom doesn't come when the narcissist loses. It comes when you stop needing them to.